Hi everyone, and welcome back to English for You. I'm Pat.
And I'm Mike.
And our article is about cancel culture. Now, in part one, we kind of learned what that was. It happens in response to something a famous person says, often in public during an interview, or mainly on social media.
That's right. Of course, famous people communicate with fans through many ways today. They'll do interviews, talk on TV or in a magazine and answer questions from a reporter. But of course, now with Twitter and Instagram and I guess even TikTok and places like that, celebrities have a much closer relationship. So maybe the celebrity says something that hurts people's feelings. And then these people, they could be fans or ordinary people who just, watch this stuff and are interested. Well, they react in an angry way. You said something that hurt me and now I'm angry and I want to get back at you and I'm mad and I want you to know my feelings. So these fans will then fill up their social media page. They'll put comments on the celebrity's page saying, you were silly, you said this, you hurt our feelings, and there's lots of us, and we are angry. And then something else happens.
Yes, they stop supporting this person and tell others, don't support them either. Let's all stop buying this person's books, seeing their movies, listening to their music, and this famous person has then been cancelled, as the saying goes.
Yeah, they're exactly right. And some of the most recent examples that you might remember from the news over the last few months include J.K. Rowling, the creator of Harry Potter. She made her beliefs about transgender women public. She made some comments on the internet about transgender women, how they're not real women or something like that. And people, of course, got upset about that. And then there was the actress who played Mulan in the new Disney movie that they released during the COVID pandemic. She spoke out in support of the Hong Kong police, not the protesters, but the police during the Hong Kong protests last year. And of course, most people were supporting the protesters, not the police, so a lot of people were upset about that too.
Yeah, so cancel culture is supposed to be helpful. It's kind of like a check on famous people. It's intended to stop them using their words to hurt others and using their big influence to affect the way other people think, and try to make these famous people think about, what are you standing for? What message do you want to put out, and do you want your fans to start agreeing with you and following?
Yeah, because rightly or wrongly, they feel that these famous people's words carry more weight. They're more important than if I said something offensive. These people can speak to millions of people at a time, so they want them to say good things. However, when the fans react angrily all the time, maybe that doesn't help, right? We're not listening. We're not really looking into what was the person saying. Why do I feel angry? Maybe it's just a misunderstanding, right? I mean, we've probably all had situations where you discovered that you and your friend were upset about something, but for the wrong reason, or you see your two friends arguing and you're like, wait, you guys don't know what you're talking about. You're confused about what you're upset about. So when we react really quickly and really angrily, sometimes that doesn't make things better.
Yeah, and we'll see in today's article, not everyone is a fan of cancel culture.
Reading. Cancel culture, calling out bad choices. In July 2020, the magazine Harper's Bazaar published a letter against cancel culture. The letter was signed by many writers, journalists, and professors. It spoke out against people who silenced others' opinions and called for the protection of free speech. The letter also gives examples of how cancel culture has hurt people's careers. At first look, most people would agree with its ideas about open discussion. However, this letter was not well received by many members of the public. Some readers pointed out that several people who were mentioned in the letter were canceled for good reason. One was a journalist who published dangerous ideas about using the military against protesters. Another was a professor who used an offensive word for black people, even after he was asked to stop. People said the letter made powerful people seem like victims while they ignore threats to ordinary people's free speech. Several people who signed the letter later spoke out against it after they heard these arguments. While the debate about free speech isn't new, the rise of cancel culture has certainly brought new voices and perspectives to it.
All right, so let's get into today's article and find out about some of the people who maybe don't really agree with this whole cancel culture idea. It says, in July 2020, the magazine Harper's Bazaar published a letter against cancel culture. So this was a letter written by, I think, a big group of people. They all kind of signed and said, we agree with this article. And it was published in this well-known American magazine, Harper's Bazaar. And it was basically them saying, we think cancel culture is bad because we'll find out more. But to publish this verb basically means to make a book, to make a newspaper, to make a magazine, and then to put it out there so that people can read it. Back in the old days, you'd publish it on paper, right? You would publish it on paper and put it in the store, and people would go to the bookstore or wherever and buy that thing. But we still use this term when you're just putting it out on the internet. So if you go on one of those websites like Medium or something where people can put their writing up, you can publish it there. But back in the old days, they would actually print it out on a piece of paper or in a book and let people have access to it, let them be able to get it and read it.
So we see the letter was signed by many writers, journalists, and professors.
Okay.
So we know writers are people who write. Journalists are people whose job is to report the news, generally by writing stories or blogs, although people can also report the news and be journalists through photos and videos.
Yeah, reporters, journalists, we kind of use them interchangeably.
Yeah. What about professors?
Professor is basically just a teacher, but a very high-level teacher. By that, I mean they wouldn't be teaching in a junior high school or somewhere, probably in a university. And the other thing about a professor is they probably are a doctor or a PhD of whatever topic they are teaching. So generally, when we talk about a teacher in a college or university, we wouldn't say teacher, we would say professor, but that's basically what they are, a teacher. For example, before becoming a university professor, Mrs. Graham worked as a journalist for many years. She probably has a PhD in journalism or English or something.
Okay, so back to this letter. We see it spoke out, there's that word again, phrase again from yesterday, it spoke out against people who silenced others' opinions and called for the protection of free speech, saying, you know, we can't control what people say, that it's their right to say what they want. So cancel culture is bad because it's against free speech.
You're basically just putting tape over their mouth and saying, we don't want to hear from you. I don't care what you're saying. I just don't want to hear it.
So here we're using silence as a verb. It can mean just to stop someone from making noise, put their hand over your mouth, or just say, shh, please be quiet. But here we're using silence to mean to prevent somebody from expressing their views, from criticizing something, or opposing someone. Think of China. People aren't really allowed to say bad things about the government, so we say they are being silenced. They're not allowed to say their opinion. So we could say when the government started arresting protesters, people who were protesting, it silenced the people's calls for change. No one was allowed to say anything bad against the government, so they were silenced. So in this letter, they said people are being silenced, that's not right, and they called for something as well.
That's right. When you call for something, basically, you're sort of saying out loud to the public, to anyone who will listen, I want this. I think this is important and I think it should happen. Yesterday, we had that word protest, right? We talked about people in the streets waving their signs and marching, showing that they're unhappy with politicians. Well, those protests are because people are calling for change. You're not actually calling for things, although you could. We could use it in that way. But here we're more like talking about how there's a big public feeling or a big public announcement saying, hey, we think this is important. We want you to know it's important. If you agree, come with us. We have this idea and we don't want to be ignored. We're calling for something to change or to be different or to improve in some way. This is important and we want other people to know about it and hopefully join us.
Okay, so people were saying stop silencing others. We're calling for the protection of free speech. And as we see in the article, the letter also gives examples of how cancel culture has hurt people's careers. Now, yes, cancel culture is supposed to make the celebrity, the famous person think carefully, but if this cancel culture really cancels them, then the celebrity may not be able to keep doing what they're doing. No one will buy their books, see their movies, listen to their music. Their career is affected.
Interesting.
Yeah, and someone's career is their working life. It's what they do over the course of their life to either make money or kind of fulfill their goals. You could have a career as a writer, as a teacher, as an engineer. You could have several different careers in your working life, anything like that. For example, after graduating from flight school, Judith began her career as an airline pilot. That was her work for almost all of her life. She was a pilot.
All right, so basically the idea is just because someone said something rude and hurt your feelings doesn't mean you should take away that person's job and their ability to make money. Is that really fair? Interesting. It says, at first look, most people would agree with its ideas about open discussion. Yeah, most people would agree that just silencing people, telling them to shut up is not really a good idea. And there should be open discussion. That's what most people would think when they first read the article. Discussion is basically a talk. When you talk with someone, usually about a particular subject. When it's just like, hey, how you doing? What's new? Oh, you got some new shoes? Oh, that's really interesting. That could be a discussion. But when it's like, let's sit down and talk about our holiday, the big test, the project that we're doing, Bob's birthday party that we're going to plan. That's a discussion. You're talking about something specific, some special subject or idea, and you're, sharing opinions and seeing what other people think. For example, Brett and his parents had a discussion about his plans for university. It was an important topic, and they wanted to have a serious talk about university.
So yeah, this idea seems pretty good. Instead of when somebody says something bad, you just say, shut up, go away, we hate you.
I don't want to hear.
Maybe we should have a discussion about these issues because discussion is going to maybe change people's minds, make the facts a bit more kind of public and easy to understand.
I didn't think of it that way.
Exactly. You don't change people's minds just by saying, shut up, go away. So this was at first, but we see that, however, this letter was not well received by many members of the public.
They didn't like it.
Yeah, some people looked at it and thought, all right, yeah, we don't want to stop free speech. But other people said, well, hang on. There's some problems with this letter as well. So what were the problems?
Interesting. It says some readers, some of the people who read this letter in the magazine, some readers pointed out that several people who were mentioned in the letter were canceled for good reason. So they're kind of saying, well, some of the people that you say were hurt by this, they really did something bad. They really did something that hurt a lot of people, and it was really wrong for them to do it. And maybe they felt that those people didn't say sorry. They didn't try to make it better. Interesting. I don't know. I didn't read the letter, so I'm not sure what they said. But some people kind of said, yeah, you're trying to say that this isn't nice. But those people, they're really bad people, so they deserved it, right? We shouldn't be nice to that. Anyways, so when you point out something, like the readers were pointing out certain things they didn't like or didn't agree with in the article, you're kind of bringing attention to something. You're making something very clear. Maybe it didn't get enough attention. Maybe the way it was said wasn't easy to understand, but you're trying to sort of clear it up, make the facts easier to understand, bring more attention, more light to the facts in some kind of way. So basically, it's kind of muddy. You're trying to bring in the bright light to show very clearly what's going on here.
So let's look at some examples of the people mentioned in the letter whose careers were hurt, but maybe they deserved it. We see one was a journalist who published dangerous ideas about using the military against protesters. So when we say the military, we mean the armed forces, the army on land, the navy on the seas, the air force in the air. Any country's organized body of soldiers, sailors, pilots, whoever would do the fighting in a war, that's the military. And so if somebody's saying use the army to fight protesters, that's using kind of government force to stop ordinary people saying we want change, we're not happy about a situation. That kind of thing is a government using its power in an unfair way. So of course this is a dangerous idea, and maybe we shouldn't say use the army to shoot all the protesters. Here's another sentence using the military, and you'll notice we're using the definite article the in this case to mean the armed forces, the country's army. We could say the military was called in to help rescue people after the terrible flood. They had to use soldiers. Soldiers came in to do the work of rescuing people. So that was one example. Okay, we've got another.
All right, another was a professor who used an offensive word for black people even after he was asked to stop.
Yeah, not really good.
If you're told to stop and you know it's wrong and then you keep doing it, yeah.
Now, I read about this. The reason the professor was using that word is he was quoting a text and using the exact words from hundreds of years ago when the word in question was more used. However, if you're quoting it, maybe you do it one time, or maybe you say, look, do you want me to use this word or just kind of say something else?
Sure.
And if people say, okay, we've heard it, don't do it, please don't do it, we're begging you to stop, and you keep doing it, that you can't really defend that action because fair enough, you can quote it once or you can check about whether it's okay to quote it. But if people tell you don't, we find it offensive, you shouldn't do it.
You're kind of being a troll. You're just trying to upset people.
Exactly. So this is the general reaction that these people don't deserve, protection. That kind of free speech, all right, but what they did was not acceptable. And if we see the article, people said the letter made powerful people seem like victims while they ignore threats to ordinary people's free speech. Like, you were hurting other people's free speech, you were doing the bad thing, so you can't be a victim and say, oh, my free speech was taken away, because that's what you were doing in the first place.
Interesting.
So in that sentence, we use the word threat, and threat here is a noun, and a threat is some kind of danger. We can use it in two ways. It could be a real thing that puts that thing in danger, like the falling rocks in this road are a threat to drivers. The heavy rains are a threat to the villages in the mountains. We can also use threat if somebody says, like, I'm gonna hurt you. They are making a threat. They're saying they'll do something violent. It's basically either a promise or a fact that could cause someone harm in the future in certain situations. So we could say, scientists are now quite sure that e-cigarettes are also a major threat to people's health. We're pretty sure these things will cause danger if you smoke them. So the letter was published. A lot of people reacted and said, well, you said that and maybe you made some good points, but you made some bad points as well.
True. And when people heard what they thought of the letter, some of the people who actually wrote the letter kind of changed their minds. It says several people who signed the letter later spoke out against it after they heard these arguments. So originally they said, yeah, I believe in everything in this letter. I support it. And then when people said, yeah, but did you think of it this way? The people who originally wrote the letter going, no, I didn't. That's a good point. But actually, that's a good point too, because sometimes you might say something, you think it's okay, someone tells you a different way of looking at it, and you can change your mind.
Yeah, and that is the point of discussion. So I'd say 1 or 2 points in the letter are right, discussion is good, some points are bad, but you can use discussion and maybe calm reactions to bring up the discussion points and logically change people's mind with reason, not just yelling.
And be kind when you do it too.
Okay, so the article finishes by saying, while the debate about free speech isn't new, the rise of cancel culture has certainly brought new voices and perspectives to it. So yeah, ever since laws were made saying people are allowed to say what they want, they have the right to free speech, other people have said, does that include horrible things? Should people be allowed to say that? And these debates have been going on for hundreds of years.
Absolutely.
In some cases.
And also, I think every case is different, right? Sometimes people are just not sure. They don't know what they're talking about. They need more education. Other times, people are just trying to be rude. But we got to look at these cases, you know, on their own, not as just one way of doing things.
Yes, and this idea of cancel culture with it happening on the internet has allowed more people to give their opinions, more people to give the facts, not just like, you two are important, you can decide what's right. No, everybody needs to be involved. So if you bring new voices, that kind of means new opinions, new people who are going to speak about this topic, and new perspectives. A perspective is a point of view. It's an opinion. It's the way you feel. It's the way you see things. So, of course, if you're looking at a particular issue, you need to have all people's perspective on it. You need to know what everyone thinks, how everyone views it, because some people might say this, others oppose it. Some people might feel offended, others don't mind it so much. But once we all understand it, we'll be able to understand how everybody else thinks. And that's really the way to solve these issues. Look at things from other people's perspective, their point of view.
The more you know about something, the better decisions you'll be able to make about it.
Okay, well, that is the end of our article on cancel culture, but we're not quite finished yet. You'll be getting our perspectives in today's For You Chat question. So this question really kind of puts our perspective on the whole article. Do you think cancel culture is harmful or helpful, and why?
Wow, well, kind of like with being offensive, it doesn't really have to be one or the other. I think sometimes it's helpful because it gets people to think about things in different ways, gets them to try to understand other people's perspectives and points of view. Sometimes it can be harmful because, you know, sometimes people just aren't trying to be offensive. They just don't know enough to say the right thing. You know, I mean, if my grandfather doesn't understand how young people think, I can't really blame him. There's a big age difference. But if some education can help, well, I think that's something we should try to do. And the other thing that I think that's really useful, it's important to listen as much as you talk, because you can learn a lot by just listening to people too.
Okay, one thing I would say is because we live in what we call a 24-hour news cycle, there are always new stories coming out. I think cancel culture, like somebody might be cancelled one month and then the next month other things will happen and that person gets forgotten. And so I'm not sure if cancel culture really does have the long-term effects. You know, suppose J.K. Rowling, who we mentioned in day one, suppose in the next year or so she writes a new Harry Potter book. Not one of her other stories, not a movie or stage play, an actual new Harry Potter book. She'll still sell millions of copies. She will still make millions of dollars. People will buy it no matter if she's been cancelled or not. So does it really have that effect? I don't know, because we'd have to see if it actually happens. Would she make as many sales as before because of her being cancelled? Mulan doesn't seem to have made a lot of money, but there are lots of reasons around that. I'm not sure what part the cancelling of Liu Yifei has affected it as opposed to other different global situations that affected Mulan and how much money it made. So I'm not sure if it's as powerful because I think things get replaced in the news cycle, something else happens, and maybe it does help in making people think about what they're saying online.
True.
But maybe not. So I'm on the fence, really.
And I think you're right. The internet's a big part of it because you see something, you can react to it very quickly. But sometimes, you know, you need to take some time and think about it and get more information and, you know, have a more enlightened or more educated point of view before you get all angry. Because, everyone's different. So
that's the end of our article. What do you guys think about the issue? Do think about it. It is kind of important. It's a tricky issue to think your way through. But that's all the time we have. Thanks for watching, everybody. For English for You, I'm Pat.
I'm Mike.
We'll talk to you again soon. Bye.
Take care.
Cancel culture, calling out bad choices. In July 2020, the magazine Harper's Bazaar published a letter against cancel culture. The letter was signed by many writers, journalists, and professors. It spoke out against people who silenced others' opinions and called for the protection of free speech. The letter also gives examples of how cancel culture has hurt people's careers. At first look, most people would agree with its ideas about open discussion. However, this letter was not well received by many members of the public. Some readers pointed out that several people who were mentioned in the letter were canceled for good reason. One was a journalist who published dangerous ideas about using the military against protesters. Another was a professor who used an offensive word for Black people, even after he was asked to stop. People said the letter made powerful people seem like victims while they ignore threats to ordinary people's free speech. Several people who signed the letter later spoke out against it after they heard these arguments. While the debate about free speech isn't new, the rise of cancel culture has certainly brought new voices and perspectives to it.
Vocabulary Review. Professor. The professor of my college course was well known for his work in mathematics. Silence. The man was silenced by the group because his views did not match everyone else's. Career. John studied for 6 years in medical school so he could have a career as a doctor. Discussion. My girlfriend and I had a discussion about whether we should take a long vacation together. Military. You can join the military when you are 18 years old and fight for your country. Threat. The strong typhoon that is developing off the coast is a threat to the small village.
智慧小补帖
Publish. Perspective.
以上节目是由活用空中美语制作。活用空中美语杂志，请洽询全国各大书店。如欲索取试听教材，请来电02-2364-4000 02-2364-4000，或上网查询，网址是 www.english4u.net www.english4u.net